afternoon, everyone, and to those joining us here and online for the first meeting of 2020, and what a year it has been so far. Chief Constable, you're very welcome, and to your Deputy Chief Constable Designate, congratulations, Mark, on your appointment, and we now know that your real start date, contractual date, has been agreed as the 10th of February, but I know that you started and hit the ground running first thing on Monday morning, so we're grateful for that. We also have a few changes in our board membership following the restoration of the Assembly. So a warm welcome to Liz Kimmins and Seán Lynch, who join us following the departure of Linda Dillon and Philip McGuigan. So you, Seán and Liz, are very welcome. We are of course delighted that the Assembly has been restored and to see the commitment to increasing police officer numbers to 7,500, and I think we'll have a question around how we get there. Chief Constable, this is an issue that the board has fully supported. The business cases for the additional officers are being finalised, so we will be then pursuing them with the Minister and the Department of Justice. We had a very successful launch of the student officer recruitment campaign on Tuesday, and it's great that already we have 1,500 applications. As a board, we are fully supportive of achieving diversity and representation in the service. And we reiterate the message for those in positions of influence and leadership to lend their support to this campaign and to encourage and support people who are underrepresented in the service to take this first step to a new career. There was some breaking news just there this morning around a sinister device, but Chief, I'm going to leave you to update us on that. So without further ado, if we can hand over to you for your introductory remarks around your report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and obviously welcome to Mark to his first meeting in this guise. There's a few things to say both operationally and then in relation to the support, to the report, and you will see obviously from what we were able to talk about this morning that we are investigating what is a viable device that was planted on the trail of a lorry in Lurgan. We are attributing this attack to dissident Republicans. Obviously, fortunately, no one has been injured. The device hasn't detonated. And there is a statement we put out this morning giving more clarity and further detail about what has happened and what we suspect lies behind this. I think for the space of this meeting today, we have got available copies of what we said this morning for members at the end, which probably gives more specifics. And to let you know, there'll be a press conference at police headquarters at 3 o'clock where we can say more as the situation develops. So unless there's any specifics on that bit, I'll just probably tease some highlights.
Sorry, Chair, can I just ask one question? And it's around the timing. The notification of the device was the 31st of January, but was it not until then, the Monday, that you got some fairly specific knowledge of which particular haulage company, because there must be thousands of lorries travelling on the ferries on a daily basis?
Thank you, George. I think there are two specific dates. Obviously, the 31st of January was one date where we received through a third party a call, and then further investigations this week, beginning on Monday. I don't really want to say too much more at the moment. Gerry and I, we've got our conference at 3 o'clock, but obviously after that we can brief members through the Chair or Chief Executive if you need further information.
Thank you. You might have to put your mic off because I don't think we're picking up the members. Mine can stay on for some reason. So if we move then to quite a number of questions, people want to come in with all kinds of questions. A lot has happened since we last met, so I'm going to start off with Colm McKenna, who has a question on the recruitment.
Chair, thank you. Chief Constable, congratulations first of all on the student officer recruitment launch on Tuesday. That was a really powerful event. But if you could say a little bit about what actions you have taken perhaps in the pre-engagement phase in order to address the issues of representativeness and diversity that the Chair referred to, and what plans you have to continue with that engagement. In your opening remarks, you did mention that the campaign will allow you to stand still effectively to cover for retirements, etc. So I'm just interested as we move forward, where are we with plans as outlined in the New Decade New Approach document, where we were hoping to be able to 7,500 police officers, which we all support. So issues.
Thank you, Chair. Well, if you take the second bit first on the 7,500, as we said in the main report column, we've now submitted the initial business case to the Department of Justice, where we set out our reasons to grow the PSNI to 7,500 police officers. Principally there, we'd see that we welcome that support so that we can invest more officers into neighbourhood policing, because that's the consistent clamour, and it fits really with the theme that came out of the consultation about local policing that obviously the board did. We haven't had any initial response yet from the Department of Justice or indeed the Executive. Clearly we're keen to get clarity between now and the new financial year to what extent they would see in the short term that extra growth of officers is going to be part of the new budget. I think it links to the recruitment question in a way that, as you quite rightly say, we're recruiting in this campaign 600 officers to keep pace with projected retirements, and therefore if we were given extra budget we'd have to see how we phase in the extra officers over and above what we think we need, so that we can just use the police college most effectively to get police officers through it. In relation to the broader recruitment question and pre-engagement, you're absolutely right. I know from recent conversations with Mark, he was central to work a couple of years ago about having looked at previous campaigns and the document barriers to recruitment. We recognised that there was more we would want to try and do in this phase to learn the lessons of the past, to look at issues where there were either blockages or frustrations. So we've done a lot of things to try and make this campaign as effective as we can. So firstly, we've retained the service of Deloitte as the third party recruiter, because you know that's something you have to do through the legislative requirements here, but they've gone back to basics in certain ways. We have streamlined the application process to try and make it quicker from the point of initial submission into the website through to the testing and then assessment centre, because we know sometimes there's been frustrations at the sheer length of time it takes to get people through that process, because they have to make other career and life choices as that goes on. We've simplified the requirements, so we've got 5 GCSE passes or equivalent, but we've taken out the maths requirement because we saw that was having a disproportionate effect on people relative to the actual skills you need to be a police officer. And we've actually pushed back the start age that you could apply to join, as if you're 17 at the point of the advert, but will be 18 by the time you're through the process. And we're allowing people from that end of their life so they can make that early decision. I think there are some more specifics where we've tried to keep pace with the world, so without making any generalisations of anyone on the board, we've launched a social media campaign that is specifically targeted at young people, and there's a range of short viral messages that will pop up through Facebook and Instagram and on your phone that will around themes, looking at values like why do you care about communities, why do you want to listen and support people in communities, or why do you want to take action on behalf of communities, to try and attract people on those bases, because like anyone else, there's probably slightly different motivations for being in the police. I think the other big shift, because we recognise there's a lot at stake with this campaign and a lot of interest, to make sure that we try and not lose momentum around being representative, and we know there's more to do. So that there's also far more of a localised feel to this campaign, so that we have engaged carefully with the 11 districts and with PCSPs to make sure that not only is there outreach, but specific events that are tailored to the local community, rather than us just deciding centrally you need one of those or two of them. We've been at Justice Fair, we've been into schools, we try to look at faith groups or the community groups that right across the sort of the spectrum of different communities that make up Northern Ireland, and also specifically trying to tailor that to groups that we want more representation on, be it Catholics, working class people, women, LGBT, and also people from minority ethnic communities. So we've tried to put a lot of rigour into that. Obviously now Mark in his new role will be the lead for the campaign and for driving representation. This obviously is one campaign. We want to see as being an iterative process that we learn as we go along. And I think the other bit that we will be doing in the future is trying to harmonise recruitment. So at the moment, even if you go into the public space how the police campaign looks is separate to how the police staff campaigns look. And we know from practice elsewhere that sometimes part of your attraction is not necessarily just into the police as a police officer first choice, but you might be working at a contact centre, and then you actually join almost within the PSNI once you've got used to how it feels to be part of that organisation. So we want to try and look at the offer going forward as being more of a harmonious one to everybody for different reasons, and see if that also helps us address some of the representation issues. As the Chair said, we were pleased with the response on Monday, over 1,500 initial applications on the very first day, but clearly we've got 3 weeks to track that, which we will be doing to see if midpoint there were things we need to put more effort into, and then we can brief the board further as the campaign progresses to its different stages.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. I got the message. About older people. Okay, we'll move then to our second question, which comes from Gerry Kelly.
Thank you. I think we're on it. In your report, you talk about drugs. It was a very comprehensive chapter on drugs. I want to thank you for that. I'm also glad to see that, as well as the very important halls of drugs or caches of drugs that they get out beyond the coast and that, which is very, very important. That there's work now being done on the ground, and we've been talking about this on the board for a considerable period of time. So on the basis that there's a number of pilots done in terms of funding around custody suites and triage in the streets, where it has been reported that a lot of this is drugs and alcohol related, people who come into that. Could you give me, first of all, an idea of how you're going to roll out on, in the districts, the right districts, the private districts especially, where this is taking place, because that's where the impact comes and where we get feedback in our offices, and also in terms of the funding, because that is a multi-departmental, or certainly dual-departmental process. They are only pilots at the moment, and is this going to be rolled out? And the last thing, I know it's 3 questions in one, but the drugs deaths attributed to drugs use is exceptionally high. It is doubled, according to Israel, over the last 10 years. So is there a multi-agency approach to that? Because I know that you were mentioned earlier today that you're interested in prevention and community safety approaches.
Thank you, Chair. Perhaps if we can do it in 2 bits, if you're happy with that, Gerry. Mark has done a lot of work in relation to this in his previous role, both the custody nurse provision and triage. So if I bring him in a minute to describe what we've done, the lessons learned, and what we want to do next. On the drugs deaths question, it is a matter that really concerns me, because as you quite rightly say, it's in the report, effectively that issue has doubled in a decade. And I think I would welcome the prompt and the broader public conversation around public policy and how we work across the government to see if there's more we can do about tackling this issue. Clearly it's not unique to Northern Ireland, and it's sadly a societal problem right across most parts of the world. But I do think that at the moment a lot of emphasis is on visible signs of drug taking and drug dealing, the effects that it has out in communities, whether it's acquisitive crime, violent crime, fueled by drug misuse, or indeed the sort of more sinister effects of serious and organised crime. Because we would say, for example, that 2 out of 3 of our organised crime groups that we target are specifically, their main commodity is drugs of various sorts. But I think in the specific question, what we're seeking a broader debate on is that sort of what is described as a public health approach to dealing with what at the moment seems to feel like a policing issue, where we can work with other agencies, as you quite rightly say, with a stronger emphasis on education, prevention and treatment, rather than seeing that law enforcement is the answer to what is a societal problem. We've seen some good practice that's been circulated to police organisations across the UK from the College of Policing, and as you're aware, we have really strong links to academia here ourselves. So we want to see over the next few months, notwithstanding other decisions we might make in the next few days about how strategically we ourselves tackle community safety and leadership and sort of organisational terms, how we encourage that conversation with the new executive, but also with the permanent secretaries that support them to see, for example, where does health sit on this issue, where does education sit on this issue, as well as what policing can do, both here in Northern Ireland, but also working with other agencies. Do you want me to sort of pause and bring Mark in, or do you want to?
Yeah, so the custody health model is one that we are very wedded to. It's been operating solely in Belfast. We want to roll it out across the country. We have a provisional business case for about 4.6 million, Gerry, to roll that out, but there has been no agreement yet between ourselves and health as to how that should be funded. So we are still trying to work that one out. We're very committed to a partnership approach, and we're very committed to going forward with health. But as the Chief has outlined, now is the opportunity. We have to go forward now and see if we can get agreement to do this across the province. We see the outcomes, certainly from the justice perspective, to be very helpful, but we're actually looking at the whole person issue as opposed to just the justice issue for a person. And our people are now thinking not just about, well, why do we arrest a person for drugs or whatever, but also why do they keep coming back? What can we do with intervention around their drug abuse or alcohol abuse or mental health issues, so that there's a whole person approach. We haven't got everybody on the page yet, Gerry, so that's a piece of work that we would certainly seek the board's support from coming forward. On the mental health triage, it started in the South Eastern Trust. It's now moved into Belfast, and that sees social worker, paramedic and police officers deployed together. And those are pilots, Gerry. There is no confirmed recurring funding for those. So again, just following up with the Chief, we would be keen to try and formalise those partnerships. And even if it's not that model, but a model that allows for each agency to shoulder their own responsibility to do it collaboratively. But in short, there is no confirmed recurring funding for any of those models. They are, well, the custody health model we don't view as a pilot. We're going to keep doing it. The triage process is probably still we regard as a pilot process.
Just want to supplement it, I just finish off with this and put it directly to you, if you can spot, so to speak. So in terms of the pilots, the police, the question is, are the police committed to putting their section of the resources which are necessary to roll this out beyond pilot? Because any reports we've got back from those two pilots is good news. So he's prepared to do that. And could I just say, as the other question, by the way, congratulations for coming, Deputy Councillor, which I said at the start. All the time I get reports, and I presume other perhaps the same, that heroin is rife within, and in your report there's a series of drugs which include prescription drugs as well. Could you just give some notion of where the heroin problem is, or how big it is?
Okay, so just to answer quickly, yes, we're very committed. We see the proper investment of justice resources as being helpful to this issue, so we're not going to walk away from it. And to be honest, Gerry, we're taking 46 calls a day on mental health, and we're taking 24% of those to hospital. So we're about 1,400 calls a month. So we can't walk away from it, but there comes a point where we have to decide how much of it we can shoulder. But we are committed to these pilots, and we think that the outcomes are really good.
I see you dodged the heroin question.
Well, I think it is.
No, it's all right. It's, well, I think the issue there is clearly some part of the drug problem, and obviously in police speak it's one of the Class A drugs, which means it's the most harmful, alongside things like cocaine, crack cocaine. I think one of the issues for us is, apart from the supply and taking of heroin, which obviously the effects are well rehearsed. For example, you touched on at the start of the question, Gerry, the doubling in drugs deaths. What we know from the statistics there is that sadly many of the people that die as a result of drug misuse are actually under the effects of sometimes 2 or 3 different drugs, where often heroin is part of that mix. So clearly there was a big question there about people understanding the risks when they're taking, as opposed to the effects of police enforcement activity. Clearly we will target the organised crime groups that were more focused on the importation of drugs either from the Republic or from across the Irish Sea. But then equally, it's what we're doing, for example, to tackle street level dealing. You know, it's well rehearsed here in Belfast. There is a problem with street level drug taking and drug dealing. That was part of the enforcement activity over the Christmas period, where we saw increased number of arrests. It also is part of the work we're doing, which is fueling a rise in overall crime figures, over 1,000 more interventions over the last 12 months around drug crime. But I think going back to your other question around a community safety but public health approach, I think we want to understand more with partners about what they're seeing and data that we don't necessarily get in terms of the strength of drugs like heroin, how that's changing over time, what it's mixed with, so that actually we can help others with better prevention advice, and trying to get for the National Crime Agency the sense of the scale of that particular drug, as well as other Class A and Class B drugs. But I think the thing not to miss, and I think you referenced it before, is one of my other concerns in many communities is actually the use of illegal prescription drugs, which seems to be, from my personal experience, in a relatively short period of time, pervasive and actually almost sitting below the radar, because in police terms it's seen as a Class C drug, therefore has less harm. But we know that it's easily available, mixed with other illegal drugs and alcohol, it has serious consequences for people. And I think that's another issue of public concern and public debate about what we're going to do about that issue.
I was say that upstairs this morning we discussed the possibility of having a public seminar on this, because it is very important that the public and all of the partners get together to understand how it can best be dealt with. I'll move now to Mervyn Storey, please.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome again, Chief Constable, and also to your Deputy. Congratulations on your appointment. Chief Constable, we'd also like to thank you and your officers for what you've done already in relation to the ongoing incident in Lurgan. It is extremely sad that there are still people in this society who are determined by vicious means to wreak havoc on this society. We've had enough of that for 40 years, which can never be justified, so thank you for what's being done there. Moving on to the issue of the correspondence that you recently sent to Peter May, you particularly highlighted the financial problem that there was and the gap that there is somewhere in the region of 53 million, which would only cover a certain number of issues. And you actually went on to say that the reality is that given the scale of the projected gap and the type of actions required, that there will be an inevitability to be a significant impact on service delivery. And it is concerning that, and you'll be well aware of a vast array of organisations who are stacking up to seek additional public finance, that it is concerning that the issue of the police hasn't been there at the same level. And so, can I just ask, is that an estimate? Is that taking into account, obviously, the very big use of overtime, which is a concern? And how do you see the issue of the finances being addressed so that you have all the resources at your disposal to keep us all safe?
Thanks, Mervyn. Yeah, well, firstly, absolutely you're right. As we sit here towards the end of the financial year, at the end of March, the unfunded pressure we're wrestling with is in the region of 53 million. And that might shift marginally if we can reduce, for example, overtime spend or the sort of phasing of contracts. But as you know also, I'm specifically bound to balance the budget at the end of the year, and obviously if I can't do that without support, the effects could be quite dramatic. If you go back to Colin's earlier question, I'm sort of rounding things up, but broadly, the amount we're in deficit, or could be, is not dissimilar to also the amount we need to grow the PSNI to 7,500. So these are significant amounts of money, but if we're to be enabled to address the issues that the public want us to do, and obviously you will outline in the plan, we need the budget balancing, but also the support to grow the organisation for neighbourhood policing. We, in fairness, have had dialogue with Peter May. He is aware of the issues that are outlined in the letter, reflect a series of individual cost pressures that will sound a lot of money when you round them up, but line by line, we are limited in the effects that we can do to mitigate against them. So, for example, one of the things that will be in jeopardy, we've had to renew the contract for ballistic body armour, which is a reflection of the security environment here, back to even today's news about a further reckless attack or planned attack by dissident Republicans. I have a duty to equip officers with that sort of equipment, and I'm bound to sort of buy it and issue it. But at the moment, the contract's part way through, so I don't want to stop doing that because of my health and safety duties. Now I have to keep funding that. You know that ultimately, if we can't resolve this, the only line that we can particularly address quickly is around people, which ironically means a threat to recruitment, both of police officers or police staff. We can again, and we're preparing that as a contingency, as you'd imagine, Mark and I, to see if we have to, where can we tuck away at the margins to try and save some money if we can't balance the budget. But a lot of that is marginal, and even the overtime question, well, we are walking towards Easter and a rise in parades and marches and things that usually consume more police resource, and actually it's part of the rationale for growing the number of officers, ironically, because if we have more officers that are available to police the streets, we can reduce the amount we rely on overtime at the moment to close the gap. So a number of these things sort of overlap, so we are monitoring the whole situation closely, and obviously the sooner we get some resolution to this through both Peter May and the Minister, we'd be really grateful.
Can I just ask for clarity, Simon, in regards to that would all be resource as opposed to a capital budget. What is the situation? Because you have and I think you're right in that particular focus, that you need to have an estate that is fit for purpose, not only having the right officers in the right place, but some of the estate that we have in the PSNI is antiquated, and that's putting it mildly. So where do you see the pressure in relation to the capital issue as opposed to the focus on the revenue?
Well, I think broadly, to modernise the estate is significant, hundreds of millions of pounds of money, but it is obviously capital, which is, you can address that. But at the moment, compared to other places I've worked, I can't borrow money, which would help me sort of offset some of those costs. I'm limited in what models I can use to try and spread, for example, capital investment in the estate. You know from the report that we've submitted to the Resources Committee that we're looking at two key strands of modernisation for the estate. One is a new police college, and another to try and look at, can we centralise what is currently a police headquarters, for want of a better word, that's dotted over a number of different sites within the city here. And we would see that there are actually, in the medium term, economies we can make if we reduce the sort of square footage of the estate. We have more modern and efficient buildings, because notwithstanding the sort of importance of an effective and clean working environment for people, we are losing money through the roof and the windows because some of the buildings are so old. So we want to try and rationalise that, and also look at how we make some of our police stations more welcoming environments, because they still reflect an era where they were heavily securitised, and if you're a victim of crime coming into one, or a member of the public, many leave more than enough to be desired in terms of what that front of house experience feels like. Clearly there are other issues behind the scenes where our oldest building is 200 years old down in Enniskillen. It's a great building, but it's probably not a police station in the modern world. And we've got over 180 quarter cabins that we have some of the most experienced detectives in the UK working out of in the fight against terrorism. So that what you might think reality is like and what it is are two different things. So we welcome again support for an ambitious modernisation programme, so that we reflect the best in class for buildings, which sometimes seem a bit emotive, but the longer we leave this, the bigger the bill will be. Coupled, when you talk about budget pressures, we've got over £40 million of backlog repairs, which we're one of the issues that we usually then make a decision to delay, because people will say, well, why are you renewing those windows or repairing that roof? But as you know from even our challenges at home, sometimes the longer you delay, the bigger the bill becomes over time. So that the pressures we've got in the overspend or the deficit you know, just add to that particular problem. But if we can look in the medium term about more imaginative ways of helping me manage the budget that reflect practice elsewhere, I can't carry reserves, so I can't even make savings to say by prudent use of public money, I can use that as a sum to either, you know, buy new uniforms, change the feel of the fleet, and I think all those things are, again, I think, up for grabs.
Allan Chambers.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to take this opportunity as well to publicly congratulate Mark on his appointment. And I'd also like to add my condemnation and outrage at the Lurgan bomb incident. I know in your statement there you talk about had it exploded at any point along the M1 or the West Link or into the harbour estate, the risks posed do not bear thinking about. But the other possibility was it had it been loaded on that ferry and exploded at sea, the consequences could have been absolutely horrendous. So I hope that any member of the public that knows anything about this incident will bring it to your attention, and that you put the people responsible where they deserve to be, and that's behind bars. My question, Chief Constable, is that we're all aware over recent days of the intense media attention around developing aspects of the Paul Quinn murder. Do the PSNI have any current plans to speak with Mr. Conor Murphy to seek clarification from him as part of their ongoing investigation, or indeed have they received any requests from the Garda Síochána to speak with him on their behalf?
Thank you, Alan. Well, first two things, you know, I would sort of reflect your concern about what may have happened by this device, which fortunately didn't detonate, and also that public appeal for information if people know who actually is responsible in relation to both building and planting this device, which was clearly reckless. In relation to that specific issue, which has been well rehearsed in the media in recent days, I think there's a couple of things we should say. First, we never comment as a matter of policy on any individual, be it as a suspect or a witness, because it wouldn't be fair to do so. And actually to remind people, this is an investigation that's been led by the Garda Síochána, and we would work at their pace, and they're best placed to determine any further lines of inquiry. So I don't think there's anything we can add to the public debate at the moment, which would be fair to any of the individuals.
Chair, if I could just make one remark in relation to the Lurgan bomb, because I know it's going to feature more later. But can I just say, the people of Lurgan rejected the dissidents and have rejected them repeatedly, and I think have worked and welcome working with the police to try to put an end to many attacks. And it's a slur, I think, on the good people of the Lurgan area, and they, given where the bomb was eventually found, would have been most at risk in more recent days. But can I ask you to tell us a wee bit more about the capability and the capacity of Dissident, if you're in a position to do that? I note in the quarterly report which we received from the NCA, there were ammunitions and guns have been intercepted on the way here to Northern Ireland, some to an address Newton Ard, which I don't know whether you're able to tell us whether that was for a paramilitary organisation or a drug gang or a criminal gang. The other is, there have been a number of murders too in my own constituency over recent weeks, and whilst the police have had a lot of success in many murders, but there are still an outstanding number of murders, including that of Laura McKee, where there have either been dissidents involved or former paramilitaries, either Republican or Loyalist, where there seems to have been an absolute lack of success and a failure to bring anyone before the courts in relation to any of those murders. So if we are to grow confidence in the community for the such of this Lurgan bomb, I think people need to see that the perpetrators are brought before the courts. So I want to know, you know, I don't doubt the community coming forward with help from others, and indeed if the police have the most up-to-date forensic technology available as a resource, because we do know that these paramilitary organisations are very forensically aware.
Thank you, George. There's quite a lot of issues there, so hopefully I won't miss any. Firstly, I think if just a few, I think actually on the forensic side of things, I've recently myself just been to see both our own forensic service provision and also the other side of the line in the forensic service, and met the new chief executive. I've been really impressed by the level of detail, the capability, and the sort of standard of forensic science provision. So that's not something I think would be a particular risk, because obviously this is also something that's driven at the pace by the investigating officer for different crimes and incidents. So I think that's a good news story for us. And clearly there's been a lot of commentary about problems with the forensic science service in England and Wales, and we haven't seen that issue here. So I do think that's a thing to be celebrated, albeit there's always room for improvement, more probably in the general space of how we deal with volume crime and specific most serious crimes like terrorism and murder. I think there's an issue about the progress and pace of investigations. I understand that, but we have some of the most experienced and highly trained detectives anywhere in the UK and indeed probably the Western world. I have every confidence in their ability, and I have regular briefings with ACC Crime Barbara Gray about specific investigations and the pace, but we have to work alongside communities in terms of the physical information and intelligence we get from them in witness statements, as well as how we capture other information we can turn into evidence like CCTV and so on and so forth. There are progress in investigations, and yes, it's frustrating maybe that people think you should be able to sometimes bring someone to book file quicker, but we have to respect the sort of lines of inquiry that the senior investigative officer will do. We do have review processes that we will put into place to make sure that based on independent advice, they haven't missed lines of inquiry or a particular part of a statement or a line of intelligence that could be expedited, and that's part of the national approach to seeing that, for example, murder is done to a really high standard. I think there's an issue as well as the swiftness of an arrest. We also have to recognise, and again it's back to the new decade new approach document, that our criminal justice process here is very slow, where sometimes it will take either hundreds or indeed over 1,000 days to get people into court. So I think there's again an issue, whilst part of the police process is to swiftly gather evidence and put it before the prosecution service to begin the journey into the courts. The delays in criminal justice, whether it's for murder, for terrorism, for sexual crime, again are well rehearsed, and something I think I welcome the Minister's view that this should be a priority for the new government to see where we can streamline and speed up process, because I as myself, if I'm going to be a witness to a police prosecution and it takes 3 or 4 years to get to court, that's a lot of uncertainty and strain. And equally, if I'm a victim, it's huge delay, and indeed not every suspect is convicted, so your life might be on hold while you wait. So I think there's a whole raft of stuff there. I'm conscious there was a load of other bits, so if there's anything I've missed.
It's just in relation, sorry, Chair, to the NCA report.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I haven't got the specifics of that seizure in front of me. I think it's fair to say we work closely with the National Crime Agency. They have, in fairness, offered us a lot of support. I think our relationship has been strong, but it is developing quite rapidly to see can we exploit as much as we can both of their investigative capacity but also expertise. And clearly there's always a worry that any guns on our streets can not just be used for organised crime, but can get into the hands of terrorists. I think broadly when you talk about capacity and capability of those groups that still want to use violence to achieve their political ends, clearly when you go over 2 or 3 decades of the Troubles, there's a difference in the availability of firearms and explosives to the past, but that's something we monitor closely with others to try and prevent people having access and capability to build either devices like we've seen that we've talked about today, but also access to firearms that people can use to kill people.
Thank you, Chair. Chief Constable, it's perhaps coincidental that the lorry found in the docks on the 31st of January, that incident occurred on the day that the UK was leaving the European Union, but could you more broadly tell us what, if any, are the immediate consequences for policing in Northern Ireland of the fact that the UK is now formally out of the EU, and in particular with reference to the sharing of information about suspects and criminal incidents and the extradition arrangements for Northern Ireland?
I think it covered broadly, just for clarity, the device wasn't found on a lorry in the docks. It was a line of inquiry on the 31st of January. obviously it was found on a trailer on Monday, so that's I think whilst there's some speculation about motive, that's something we can speak about a bit more at 3 o'clock. In relation to the EU exit, realistically, operationally at the moment, not a lot has changed, so that the issues that were still important to us last week and the capabilities, whether it's the European arrest warrant or other powers, are broadly still the same. There are a couple of countries, for example Germany and Austria, where it will be different in terms of extradition of their nationals. But what we're now looking to do is continue to work with the government to see what, now we've left, is once we've gone through transition, what the new arrangements will be, and we can brief further as the year develops about our understanding of new powers and policy.
Well, just a very quick follow-up. As regards the cooperation with Europol and other international policing organisations, has nothing changed for the time being?
That's right. I mean, clearly we have very good relationships with Garda, which operate both daily. I was only myself with Drew Harris 2 days ago, so that on that sort of dynamic, I think relationships are really strong and developing, and similarly we are sort of well wired into the Europol network for a whole variety of reasons.
Thank you, Chair. Chief, you'll be aware that there's a series of allegations in Fermanagh. These have been serialised through a local newspaper over the last 6 months, perhaps a bit more. There's a view among some people, and I think particularly the journalists, that these are not being taken seriously. My question would be, are there extra resources being focused on these allegations, and are they being taken seriously?
I think there's a few issues there, Seán. I think obviously we have reported for a number of months on this issue, so clearly it's a matter of concern both in the community, and we know there's one particular journalist that has expressed concerns in relation to this. I think there's a few things we can update you on. Firstly, that there's 46 investigations currently running in relation to child sex abuse in Fermanagh. We have arrested 2 suspects, and another suspect is interviewed, having come into the police station voluntarily. There's 25 victims who have been willing to engage with this new inquiry, and we've only in January spoken to 6 victims, but part of this, without sounding too defensive, because of the complexity and the sensitivity of this investigation and the way we have to recover victims' evidence in crimes like this, is it often does proceed at slow pace so we can achieve what we call best evidence. So it's not lack of resolve on behalf of the investigating officer, nor is it actually a lack of detective resource, but we are trying to be victim-centred and therefore need to work at the pace of victims to both obtain evidence and then see where lines of inquiry can lead to arrest. I'm sure it will remain a matter of concern until we see people actually in the court, and again we can brief into the board or indeed locally as the investigation progresses. But at the moment there is nothing that leads me to be concerned that it's not a lack of resolve on the part of the PSNI, it's just working at the pace of victims.
I just want to touch on another issue that you mentioned. It was Enniskillen Barracks. It's a great location. It's based on the Erin. Is it your view that you will vacate that sometime? It's a listed building and it would be a great place for an hotel.
Well, we do offer all sorts of hotel services at Musgrave Street, but probably not in that space. I think, frankly, I wouldn't want to set hairs running and sort of look at an estate policy, but I think realistically, I mean, I've been there a couple of times, and I think it's a fantastic historic building, the police station there, but it probably isn't one we want to see that we retain in the long term, and we'd want to work with interested parties really to see where you could make best use of that site, because as you know, it's in a prime location. I'm not a property developer, but you could see its attractions as a hotel or something like that, and then look to see how you still have a police station somewhere in or near the town centre so that we remain visible and we can get police resources out to emergencies quickly, etc. That particular building isn't in the outline business case because we've had to make some tough choices about what we want to invest in first and last. So I think what we're trying to do is, as we progress through this journey to modernise the estate, see are there other models we can use where we look at good practice elsewhere about partnering, for example, with somebody that might enable us to A, accelerate the build in certain parts of the country, but B, do it in ways where we're not as at risk for the capital spend. And you can, there's things you might be where you can do around land transfers or a third party provider where you can effectively use that site for example, a commercial interest such as a planning permission, and then get the same people to build your new police station. So we're looking at all those different models, but yes, I mean, it's a fantastic building, isn't it? But it's frankly sinking into the sand.
So I just come back again to the historical abuse case. I just noticed that you had 46 investigators are broken down into 3 categories, and one of them is 21-year reports which relate to alleged offenders who are now deceased. The question is simple. Does that mean that you do not investigate those, or that you will investigate whatever information you can get, but I presume they can be connected to others?
Well, yeah, without going into, because I need to get more information from the investigating officer, Gerry, whether there is any correlation between some of those deceased suspects and anyone else that we've either arrested or pursuing. So I can probably see how we can discuss that elsewhere. But clearly, victims, a bit like in other issues we deal with, want some resolution, so we need to actually take a statement to understand the allegations and see if it forms part of a pattern, but clearly we can't bring them a justice resolution.
Well, my point is precisely that although those who are alleged offenders are deceased, there is still an issue around victims.
Go to Wendy. Wendy, I know you have 2 questions of different topics, but you want to take the first one?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, Chief Constable, I have 2 questions on 2 different issues. The first issue is that you gave us a report on Operation Season Greetings, and I know there are a number of key issues in relation to that report about domestic violence and drugs, but I want to focus on road safety and particularly the drug driving. Clearly you had quite a large social media campaign and quite good outreach in relation to that, but it didn't seem to act as a deterrent because there was a high level of detection for drug driving. And my question is about, is this a growing risk for the population of Northern Ireland? Do you see this as a trend that more people are unfortunately going out to drive under the influence of drink or drugs?
Well, thank you for that. Well, clearly, I suppose this is a double-edged sword for us really, because you'll see from the figures in the report that we increased the amount of checks that we ran this year compared to last year, so that I think there's a correlation between the more the lot, the more you'll find. And also, actually when you go into the detail, some of where we ran checkpoints and at the times of day, be it not just in the evenings, but looking at the next morning problem, which often doesn't land home, that you could have been out all night, think you've sobered up and get in the car and find yourself being arrested. I think we are currently, Allan Todd is the lead for this campaign, and I know he's commented on the media. We're going through the analysis of what this all means for this year in terms of lessons learned and preparing for next year's Christmas campaign. Clearly, there are some issues we've got to understand. Fatalities are up, sadly. So there were 10 people lost their lives over the Christmas period on our roads compared to 3 last year. So that is quite awful, both pedestrians and people in vehicles. We are working closely with the Road Safety Partnership to look at underlying trends in both things like causation factors and driver behaviour. But I think the stark reminder to all of us is that over 400 people being caught would seem to be that, try as we might, the people either don't think it's going to be them in terms of getting caught, or are complacent or indifferent to the dangers they cause by either drink driving or drug driving to both themselves and other road users. So it's a campaign we want to keep pushing, and certainly notwithstanding the budget questions that we've touched upon, if I can, I would like to invest more police patrol resources into roads policing to help keep our roads safe.
Thank you, that's helpful. My second issue is about the review of policing in South Armagh. And following your visit to South Armagh over the Christmas period, you clearly initiated a review of policing in that area. So my first question is about how serious are you concerned about how policing is carried out in that particular community? And then my second question relates to the review itself. It is to last for 6 months, and it's an in-house review, which suggests it's internally focused. So I'd like you to reassure us that, of course, these are issues that are pertinent to the community. So will the focus be highly external as well as internal in terms of listening to people and taking on board their views?
Well, certainly in terms of the review, it's been led by Phil Knox, who is the Chief Superintendent currently at the college, and you'll know from other issues, he came in to sort of tidy up all the implementation issues around the cheating scandal at the college. So I think it's somebody that is well versed in taking a balanced and yet determined view to look at some of the issues that probably need addressing. The review was sort of my reflection on my visit to Crossmaglen and a picture that caused some concern in some communities, and we've gone into that in other places. But actually, in truth, having listened to people in the community, in fact, Dolores and I met at the police station with Councillor Byrne, but it wasn't the only conversation I had. We met with Sinn Féin and with the Alliance Party to see what did this mean, both for my understanding of the community, but policing in general. And I took a lot away from those meetings, and it led me to sort of reflect on, if you like, the conditions in Crossmaglen Police Station are unique. It is effectively a concrete bunker with no windows. It looks like it's from another era, and actually we still have officers that live there. So you then take a step back and ask yourself, apart from me going, what in terms of mindset we do to people when we let them live 24 hours in a concrete box with no windows, surrounded by a 40-foot high fence, and then say we feel we needed to adopt a certain policing stance. And there seem to be some contradictions, because I've been there a couple of times, including Christmas Day, and the underlying issue for me was I've been hugely impressed by the commitment of local officers to neighbourhood policing, to reaching into schools, youth groups, and into other parts of that part of the country, to actually challenge some of the perceptions of the past and actually try and work in a policing response that is like anywhere else in Northern Ireland. I thought having listened to political parties in the meetings that I held afterwards, I thought the easiest way to address this is to ask ourselves some questions about have we got the balance right. But it is not purely an internal review, so we were quite specific. I can send you a copy of the terms of reference if you want, that this was to be done in concert with the community and very transparently. So I know Phil has already been down a number of occasions to meet local people and see how this is done and done alongside people. So it's not just the PSNI deciding we want to change the look and feel of the police station or we want to change the patrolling style. It is actually an opportunity, I think, to reach into that part of the country and see what we could do differently around bringing neighbourhood policing to bear in probably a faster way, and then seeing what lessons we can learn for the rest of the country from that exercise. You're right, it's a 6-month piece of work, and we will obviously come back to the board when that work is finished to say both what is said for that part of the policing operation, but also wider lessons learned, because I think it will help us hold the mirror up to ourselves to say, 20 years on from Patton, have we got the balance right?
Thank you, Chief Constable. I have read the terms of reference, and I think it's really, I think the process of that is really important, because this goes to the heart of policing with the community, and therefore the solutions for these issues should be as much community-based solutions as they possibly can be.
Just on that point very briefly, Chief, I would just ask you to also take into consideration that in that community, we often hear a lot about minorities in Northern Ireland. There is a Protestant minority that have lived under the heel as well of gangsterism, terrorism for a long, long time, and still to this very day has the scars. And we've heard over the last few days the horrendous issues in relation to the murder of Paul Quinn and what that family have gone through and what happened in that result. I also ask you to bear in mind that there are people still living in South Armagh from another minority who still to this very day have those scars, and they the same as everybody in the community, a very good responsive case study.
Well, I think it's a bit like the first question today around recruiting. We have to show we're impartial and we're also representative of communities, and it extends not just to how we have officers and staff in our mix, but the policing style, and that it is balanced. And I think the opportunity going forward, it is visible and it's based on community and neighbourhood policing.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of Enniskillen Police Station, I think there are more lucrative approaches than necessarily a hotel. I'm not wishing to get in the way of Seán's desire to run a hotel in Enniskillen, but it is a lovely building, well worth looking at. My questions, Chief Constable, are around the return of the Executive and the Assembly, and the flurry of activity, I suppose, that's come about on the back of that. I want to ask in a couple of areas that we specifically affect PSNI. First of those is around the fact that we've had an immediate announcement that teachers, well, that's nursing staff and the Department of Health and the Department of Education were receiving pay rises. We know that the Federation already asked for implementation of the 2.5%, and I wonder where that sits, particularly given the conversations we had earlier around the deficits in funding that the PSNI have. And then the other question is in relation to a statement made by the Justice Minister again on the reforming of or the Stormont, and that is that confirmation that legislation is to be introduced to make abusive behaviour in domestic and close family relationships a criminal offence. And I wonder how that impacts on the PSNI, whether you've had conversations with the Department of Justice relating to that, and what it means for training and indeed for the personnel that you require to carry out and to safeguard families in those positions.
Okay, if I can take the first bit, I just want to, do you want to comment on the second bit, because the previous DPC bit Mark might have a bit more detail. But obviously we welcome sort of legislative modernisation where we can protect victims, and we'll come back to that. But I think you raised a really good point on the pay rise, because it would be remiss, I'm not the Federation, but I'm their employer. I think it's a real disappointment that we're still waiting for news on a pay rise that hit England and Wales in September. We, even at today's events of a civilian terrorist threat, show that our officers are unique now in the United Kingdom. We're the only place working in these conditions with this jeopardy. And it runs alongside the recruitment campaign, and in terms of being valued, because we're still waiting for a pay rise, and some 7 months later, we're only asking for parity. And I would welcome explanations about, we've had dialogue this year with the Department of Justice to get the issue resolved, but why in the first place it takes so long from an award that takes place in England, Wales in September to wash through the system, and then the officers have to catch up. We've been able to grant a pay rise to police staff more quickly, but clearly it's something that we would welcome support about how we can streamline that process to give people that particular confidence, bearing in mind the particular challenges that they face on our behalf. Do you want to talk about the legislation piece just quickly, Mark?
Just very quickly across, there's actually, we have a list of pieces of legislation that have been waiting to go through the Executive, from domestic abuse to biometrics to changes to pace regulations and so forth. So there's a whole list of these things that have been sitting there. So we could probably fill the whole board space with all of them. Now is the opportunity to bring these things forward. We're very hopeful that A, we'll get them through, but secondly, that there will be a collaborative approach, and it won't be just about passing a piece of legislation on behalf of the police, but we can form the partnerships across relevant agencies. But we could probably just, over time, do a full brief to you, Doug, on that. I think we have something 15 pieces actually of legislation, not just around domestic violence, which need to be addressed now that the Assembly is back in the running.
I want to come back to you, Dolores, because we have another question. Quick question.
Well, I'll make them quick. There's two status reports. One is on Durham, and whether or not the police ombudsman is still under criminal investigation by the PSNI, and we were, I think, told that we would have had a final report in December in relation to that and the investigation of the two journalists. And the other is the disclosure review that was put into the hands of SEC Clark alongside Sejini. So I wonder when we might hear, particularly given the 100-day legacy challenge, which the new approach has set the British government and the Executive.
Okay, thank you. In relation to the Durham investigation, we have been in contact with it. There's been a new investigating officer appointed who's been seconded from South Yorkshire. She's in the final phases of her investigation and preparing the final report. So I think it would be presumptuous to second guess what she's going to say, but we are promised it's imminent. So maybe even by next time we can give you a bit more detail. And similarly, George Clark has been working closely with the Ombudsman to see about how we improve the disclosure issue. And I've sat down with him and with the Ombudsman at different times to look at the new computer system, which I think is a significant step forwards that came in place in the summer and was put in place specifically to try and overcome some of the issues that arose in relation to the disclosure problem that fell out of the Seán Graham bookmaker's investigation. So I think we're in a far stronger place than we were, and I know it's something that George takes very seriously. But again, I think maybe next month we can work with the chair to see if there's a bit more detail we can give on board.
Does that conclude the questions? So just before we just wanted to say on behalf of the board that
we are concerned about the latest news about this device, and very grateful that officers managed to intercept it wherever it was going to go, because wherever it was going to go was going to cause serious damage. And just to reiterate your comments that we need the community support to try and make sure that this doesn't continue. So thankfully everyone who was involved in bringing that to a conclusion at this stage. The next public meeting is on Thursday the 5th of March, when we will have a fully fledged Deputy Chief Constable as well. So we look forward to that. Thank you very much.